At this point in time, I have two test servers, Test Server Oregon 1 and Test Server Oregon 2. I've used a couple of the DNS setups that we did before. In this particular case, I've done a DNS round robin here using one A record with two IP addresses. I've also done a weighted round robin with two separate records. These are going to behave a little bit differently when I end up taking a server down. Both of these are weighted the same, so really, for the most part, I would expect these two different types of entries to act in a similar manner. Half of the request should go to this IP address and half of the request should go to this IP address. Likewise, as these both have weights, it should go to these two different IP addresses. Let's go ahead and use this. This is the DNS round robin. I refresh, I refresh, I refresh, and I'm getting Oregon 2 all the time. Great. This is DNS weighted round robin, and I'm hitting refresh several times. In this case, I happen to be getting Test Server Oregon 1. Okay, cool. So let's first look at DNS round robin, where I've got Test Server Oregon 2. If you remember correctly, this particular one is where I've got two IP addresses in a particular A record. Now if I go over here to MOBA Xterm, where I've got a shell, I'm going to take Test Server Oregon 2, I got a tab open to it, I'm going to stop Apache. Easy, I can do this with one command, hit enter, Apache 2 is now down. If I come back over here and hit refresh, hey, look at that, it actually switched over servers, which is something that if I remember correctly in a prior video I wasn't very clear on, but it did successfully switch over on servers even though server 2 went down. Now I'm going to go back over here and turn the server back on. At this point both servers are working, and if I refresh it actually pops back over to Test Server Oregon 2. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to hit refresh, and at this point for this particular setup I am on Test Server Oregon 1. I'm going to go back over to this tab and I'm going to shut down server 1. Okay, server 1 is down. I'm going to hit refresh. And this site can't be reached. This is kind of interesting, and why did this occur? Well, we can make sense of it if you realize that when I do a DNS request, I get one record back. In this case, when I did a DNS request, I got one record, and the one record happened to include two different IP addresses. Therefore, when the web browser was unable to hook up to one IP address, it then flipped to the second backup IP address and did that one instead, because I actually had both IP addresses. In the case down here, the web server only got one of these two records. So it either got this record or it got this record. And in that case, it didn't have a backup IP address to go to in case the first one didn't work. Therefore, when I took down server 1, it wasn't able to go to the backup server at all. Doing failover based on DNS lookups really, in either of these techniques, really is not the best way. We need something better. And in order to do that, we can, with Amazon Web Services, we can actually create a load balancer. A load balancer is a much more advanced way of managing load. We can do all of the things that we could do with a DNS-based round robin, but much better. So let's take a look at load balancers. In order to create a load balancer, I'm going to go down here to the lower left where there's an option to create, well, load balancers. Click on it, and I got a load balancer I've already set up. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to create a new load balancer. There are two different types of load balancers that you can create right now. There's an application load balancer, and there's also a classic load balancer. The application load balancer is a little easier to set up for web, but the classic load balancer shows some of the options a bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and create a classic load balancer. Note that you can actually create a regular web load balancer like it recommends here, and you'll just have fewer options available and it'll streamline the process a bit. But for full understanding, I'm going to go ahead and select Classic Load Balancer. At this point, I've got my load balancer name. I'm going to call this test2-load balancer. This is not an internal one. I'm going to face out to the internet. And in this case, I'm going to load balance web on port 80. This looks good for me. Click on add. Whoops, I don't need to actually add. I can delete that. All I want is the web one. I will assign security groups. I already have a security group set up for web, so I'm going to use that security group. That's fine. Then what's going to happen is it's going to create health checks. It is periodically going to go to HTTP port 80 and look for a file called index.html, which I happen to have. And as long as it can pull that page, it will consider the host to be healthy and it will keep it in the load balancer. Now I'm going to add Ec2 instances. I want to add my test server Oregon 1 and my test server Oregon 2. Hit next. You can add tags. I don't need to add any tags. I'll just keep going. And here we go. I think I've basically got everything set up. I'll hit create. There, that was not too bad. At this point, I have a load balancer. Okay, I'm taking a look at the load balancer here. I've got my test2 load balancer. This is the description for it. This is a DNS record that I can copy and paste into my browser window. I don't want to do that right yet because I got to let it have a little bit of time to set up. I'm going to select instances, and right here I can see I've got my test server Oregon 1, test server Oregon 2. Both are listed as out of service. It has not yet started up and checked them yet, so I need to have a little bit of patience and wait for that to happen. This is the health check, so it's going to go look at index.html, and it needs to get a response within 5 seconds, and it will do it every 30 seconds. So if that server goes down within 30 seconds, it should know about it. But it's actually going to wait twice before it actually takes that server out. So it has to error out twice when it tries index.html before it considers the host to be unhealthy. So that'll take basically about a full minute. And I got some other monitoring going on here. We'll talk more about that later. Okay. I'm going to pause here for a little bit until these instances go from out of service to in service. Okay, at this point in time, I've got both of these different items in service. I could remove them from the load balancer if I want. I don't want right now. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and copy this DNS entry, copy it, paste it up here, and see if it brings up our server. And indeed, there we go. I've got test Oregon server 2. And you can see it's actually load balancing between test Oregon server 1 and 2 as I keep sitting here and hitting refresh. Now, depending upon how my load balancer is set up, I may or may not want that. I can take a look at the instances. I can take a look at underneath description. There's a particular option known as edit stickiness. If I set this to enable a load balancer generated cookie stickiness, then basically it will keep trying to go to the server the same server over and over again. This can be useful if a particular server is storing information about the user, and if I switch servers, it'll forget that information about the user, like the fact that they're checked in, like the fact that they're logged in or something. So if I enable stickiness, I can basically give it about 5 minutes or so worth of stickiness. At this point, then when I start refreshing, you can see I'm now stuck on Oregon server 1. Excellent. Now, if I go over here to Oregon server 1 and stop the service, there we go. I refresh this, and I'm going to error out. And I will keep errored out until the load balancer manages to figure out that that particular server is not healthy. Okay, it didn't take too long, and I managed to figure out that Oregon server is out of service, and this particular Oregon server is in service. If I go back over here and refresh, you'll see I'm automatically popped over to test server on Oregon 2. There you go. That's how you set up load balancers. Fairly easy to put together, a little bit more robust, a lot more options that are available than if you were to do load balancing based upon DNS.